This is a great opportunity to come together, and we're really appreciative of you giving up your time, as well as those you're going to meet shortly who'll be speaking on this webinar, to really explore our collective thinking on the recovery curriculum. And for us in Education Development Trust, this is a particularly exciting time, because we are using the work, particularly that Barry Carpenter has done on the recovery curriculum, to develop our lines of inquiry for peer review that is focusing particularly on curriculum and recovery curriculum at this time. So let me introduce you to who we've got here today. So I'm Maggie Farrer. I work for the Education Development Trust as an associate with the peer review programme, the Schools Partnership Programme. And we've got a number of presenters and panellists with us. In a moment, you're going to hear from Vanessa Hughes-Jones, who's an SPP associate, former head teacher, and she's going to be looking particularly at how we're using the recovery curriculum in Education Development Trusts and in peer review. Then we are particularly delighted to have with us Professor Barry Carpenter from the Oxford Brookes University. And with Barry's work and through the words that he's going to share with us, we're going to be examining the 5 levers of the recovery curriculum. And then we're going to be joined by 3 school leaders, Katie Fielding, Helen Rowland and Liz Davison. And absolutely delighted again to welcome them. And I know from having spent time with all 3 of them that they are school leaders who model a very compassionate, relational-based approach to their leadership and their approach to curriculum recovery. So I know that you'll hugely enjoy the panel we've got, and obviously you'll enjoy hearing from Barry in a moment. I want to start just by setting the scene, particularly in relation to the work of Education Development Trust and what we do, and our vision of building a sustainable, self-improving school-led system, where schools are jointly responsible for their improvement and for the improvement of others. And that sort of trips off the tongue, doesn't it? But we like to think that the work we're doing with so many of you who are on this webinar, because I know there are many of you who work with us, bringing this to a reality through the practice of peer review. We know there are a number of you who we don't know yet, who are new to Education Development Trust, possibly new to peer review, although you may have your own model. And we'd very much like to stay in touch with you, and there'll be an opportunity after this webinar to get in touch further if you'd like to know more about the work we do and about the peer review programme. And the reason that we're here today and the reason why we are emphasising the power of peer review is that we've always said that peer review exists to help schools to address the most pressing issues of the day, in partnership with colleagues from other schools to find and implement shared solutions. And my goodness, I think we are all living through the most pressing issue, probably of our lifetime. And schools we know, and those of you all on this call, are doing the most amazing and incredible job. And we're hoping that this webinar will be some support to help you to continue to do that well. A quick look at the peer review cycle that underpins our work, and Vanessa will say more about this in a moment. It's a 3-part model. Starts with the school being reviewed, engaging in their own self-review. They're in the driving seat. They set the focus for the peer review. The peer review then happens in the school. It's an evidence collection process. And then there's a follow-up workshop, which is led by a middle leader and is where the staff of the school work together to look at the findings of the peer review and to come up with solutions for themselves. And for us, that sense of agency and empowerment is a really important theme, which we know will be a theme that we'll explore in more detail as we work through this webinar. But first, a chance for us to collectively build a shared understanding of why we're here and what we mean when we use the phrase recovery curriculum. And at Education Development Trust, we're particularly excited by this because we mean, and I know Barry and those of us here on the panel today mean, not recovery of the curriculum, but recovery through the curriculum. And we're especially interested in how the curriculum can also be an opportunity, not only for the children, but also for us as leaders and teachers to recover and then thrive through developing our own sense of agency and empowerment, to take action and collectively work together to develop a curriculum fit for the 21st century, just as you will hear some of the school leaders who will be speaking in a moment have done. So cultivating our own well-being and that of our colleagues, as well as attending to the well-being of children, goes without saying. It's never been more important than now. And we know that, Barry, your ongoing work on the recovery curriculum will be especially helpful here. But let's just take a moment now and give you a chance, just those few words, introductory words from me, just to get a sense of what the recovery curriculum means to you when you hear those words. And you've probably read Barry's paper, so have got some sense of where his thinking's coming from, but just pop into the chat what it means to you, a word, phrase, a thought, and we'll just take a moment to see what comes up there. So just pop into the chat. Word, phrase, what does the recovery curriculum mean to you? And we can start to see, and the panel will be able to see these coming up now. Whoa, now they come quickly. We will be capturing this chat, so don't worry if you can't spot everything that's coming through. Support, resilience, reconnection, small steps, getting back on track, catching up, maintaining engagement, supporting loss, love, induction, recovery of learning power, building stamina, creativity. Barry, I'm sure you can see you're smiling at these as you're coming up. Gather and reconnect, beautiful, lovely words, transition, a less intense curriculum, restorative, return to business as usual, rebuilding, learning fitness, connecting with community, focused on the pupils, etc., etc., refreshing. Oh, lovely. But I hope you're all smiling when you see these coming up, but just reading these. We were just saying as we came on 15 minutes before we started, the good news about the vaccine lifts our spirits. And my goodness, this lifts our spirits. These phrases and these words come through. Thank you. So what's going to happen now? Well, between now and just before 5 o'clock, we're going to hear from Vanessa, then Barry, then Katie, Liz and Helen. Then we'll get a conversation going as best we can with all the people who are on this webinar. We're up to 210 now. So please feel free, as people are speaking, when you hear from Barry and our 3 school leaders, please feel free to pop into the chat any thoughts, any questions, and we'll be gathering some themes as we go through that we can return to in a wider discussion. Then Barry will say a few words to sort of bring our thoughts together towards the end, and I'll then wrap up with next steps. Just so you know, all the slides used today and a recording of this webinar, together with a resource pack, which will include everything that our guests today reference in terms of resources, will all be made available to you through the Education Development and SPP Schools Partnership Programme website, and you will receive a link to all of those resources, the slides and the recording in a follow-up email. So I'm just going to remove the chat from there, and I'm going to say welcome to Vanessa and invite Vanessa now to say a little more on the background to Education Development Trust's work in this area and what we're learning. Vanessa, over to you.
Okay, thanks Maggie. So hello colleagues, it's lovely to see so many familiar names popping up through the chat, which is great. So I'm just going to spend the next 10 minutes with you, 4 key slides that I'd like to share, and I want to start off by just establishing a bit about the background and how this piece of work came about. So we'd always intended, as part of the SPP work, to put a framework together in addition to the other suite of materials that we have around the curriculum. And I came to this piece of work in April this last year, And of course, we were hitting the height of the pandemic, and all of a sudden, focusing on a piece of curriculum work based on previous normal times seemed very inappropriate. And as a team, we felt we needed to look at something that was much more useful and would help school leaders returning to school in September and be a useful aid to looking at this particular subject. So Barry, I'd been introduced to Barry's work through another colleague. I was very drawn to the content. It really sort of resonated and touched a spot. And so out of that came the framework. So the work is largely based on Barry's work, and that's been an absolute pleasure to get to grips with and unpick. But we also dipped into three other pieces of research, and I just want to make sure we highlight those as part of the evidence base. So I contacted Helen at the Focus Trust, who I've worked with in the past, and asked her what she was doing about the return to school and her approach to the curriculum. So we worked with them and focused a great deal on what Helen called at the time the reconnection curriculum. I was also fortunate to be part of a webinar that the Ambition Institute ran, and they talked a lot about the response to the coronavirus and looking at how we could come back and approach the curriculum after school closure. And then finally, a wonderful blog by the Greenfields Consortium, and they talked a lot about recovering through the curriculum. So the basis for the work came from those four pieces, with Barry's piece sitting largely at the beginning. So out of that, and putting all the pieces of evidence and research together, there were numerous words that were coming up over and over again that were resonating with me. And I won't go through all of those words now, but fundamentally, that the key ones are there in front of you on the screen in those three stages. And then out of that, I sat and picked through and shared the findings with the team. What were those common, agreed, I've called them non-negotiables, that the key areas that all four pieces of research talked about continually. And they are listed for you there at the bottom. So these were the key strands that came out of the four pieces of research that underpin that piece of work and resonate very heavily with Barry's contributions. So I guess you won't be surprised: compassionate leadership, driving values and principles, oracy, reading, really powerful vehicles for dialogue, that came up over and over again. The need to have a very shared and common vocabulary around this piece of work. Experiential, inquiry-based approaches to looking at this, reaching out and posing questions to investigate and explore how we want to unpick this piece of work. Consistency and routine, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that, but underpinning all of that was about having a very personalised, contextually driven response, because every school is dealing with a myriad of issues, but they're all very pertinent to your school and your staff and your children. And then finally, how can we use the best evidence out there? How can we make the best decisions and be informed well about how we want to start this next stage of the journey? So those key themes were very consistent in all four pieces of work, and we use those as the next stepping point. Thanks, Maggie. Okay, so Maggie's given you a little bit of a starter for 10 as to how the SPP peer review model works, and it's there in front of you. So the self-review starts with the school having that ownership of those discussions and that dialogue and the inquiry. The collaborative peer review, again, we have a focus, we have a structured conversation to explore and investigate, we feedback success and define next steps. And then the specific unique element of the SPP process is that we follow up with a school-based workshop. So those three parts of the SPP programme were a very strong vehicle behind the work that sat within Barry's article. So again, we've got the 3 stages at the bottom. They are not running concurrently. The self-review doesn't necessarily reflect the stage 1 process underneath. The review process at the top can sit within any of those 3 circles and work very effectively. So the beauty of the cycle is that there's no beginning, there's no end. You dip in where it's appropriate, you dip in at the start point for where you feel is appropriate to school, and you can use that peer review process to enable you to evaluate successes and start conversations and look at what might come next. But again, just picking up on the themes from the previous slide, this is about the principles and the values of leadership. It's about striking that dialogue, looking at that inquiry-based focus, but very much thinking about this at your level, within your school and your school community. Thanks, Maggie. So the principles of peer review, these are lifted from the NEHT document that came out in September 2019. What are the principles of very effective peer review? And there they are in front of you. There's 9 of them. I've posed some questions alongside all of those to beef them up a bit, really, and to give some structure. So the spirit of inquiry, you know, if we're looking at the recovery curriculum as a vehicle to move our thinking on, what are we learning about ourselves? What do we believe in and hold to be really valuable, important? The collaborative agency, as Maggie mentioned at the beginning, done with, not to, the school. We want this process to empower. We want to enable you to hold those conversations and look at developing practice. Everybody has a responsibility to be part of that. It's about building deeper relationships, credibility and authenticity, again, dropping into the evidence-led and expert information that we can draw on. So there's 2 bits to this, really. Barry talks a lot about losses and gains in his documents. This is something for everybody. This is for leaders and teachers and pupils within our school community. And some of the levers that Barry talks about in the article, we've particularly framed key questions around that, focusing on relationships, community, transparency, and I'll let the other panelists unpick those with some examples as we move forward. 4 key elements I just want to pull out of this one as we move on to my last slide are around the challenge, the control, the community, and the commitment. So the final signposting that I'd like to share with you is this wonderful article from the Mercer Group. If you haven't had an opportunity to look at this, I would urge you to just to dip in and have a look. So taking those 4 key strands from how we know peer review works very effectively, the messages that Barry has as a very strong theme running through his document. And the Mercer document talks very much about the challenges we've all faced during the pandemic and the psychological research around our need to have positive interaction with each other during these times, to feel that we're part of something really important and that we can commit to. Stretching ourselves but not overwhelming ourselves, and that need to have control over what we're doing. And I think the final point I wanted to share with you is that the peer review cycle, the collaborative coming together in a supportive manner as school colleagues, using the material that Barry has put together for us and looking at those 4 C's, I think are an excellent foundation and stepping stone for us to be able to engage in something real and meaningful that's got great value and can reach everybody in a very positive way.
Vanessa, thank you, and thank you for taking us through that so carefully. And we know how excited, don't we, that we've been by these 4 C's, because they seem to really embody the lived experience that so many of us are going through at the moment. So thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing all of that. I'm now going to move on and introduce Barry to you, followed by the 3 school leaders that we have with us today. And I know what Barry's diary is like, and I know what the diaries of the 3 school leaders are going to be on the panel are like. And I have to say we are so grateful for you joining us, as well as all those of you who are on the webinar. Your time is so precious, so we are deeply grateful and appreciative that you're all here. So Barry, we're looking forward to hearing more about the origins of this work, where it came from and why it's so very important to you, and how your thinking has developed over the last 9 months, particularly since you wrote this, as the world has been changing so rapidly. So thank you, Barry. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Maggie, and thank you to you and the Education Development Trust for the invitation to be part of this. And particularly, I want to commend the work that Vanessa has just described to you. It was a complete thrill to me when Vanessa and Anne Cameron, who leads on the school's partnership work, contacted me to have a conversation about the recovery curriculum and the peer-to-peer review they'd been doing, which I knew nothing about. And as somebody who obviously who's committed to research and have been throughout my career, to suddenly get the evidence base through their rigorous process of scrutiny being brought to me, because when the think piece was written and first published on the 25th of April, it's hard to think that it's still only a matter of months since that came out, that there was the evidence base for everything we'd hypothesized and made our best judgments about. And I say we because thank you for the many references to my work, but actually it's a joint piece of work, co-written very much so with my son Matthew, whereas the work on the 5 levers and the trauma and anxiety, etc., are very much mine. The pedagogical thinking around the 5 levers, the relationships, community, etc., which I know Helen and Liz are going to refer to later, then it's very much Matthew's work, and we are both very glad to have this opportunity to share with you and indeed the other colleagues that have been involved in this work. Next slide, please. So you've seen there the reference to the full piece, and can I just commend to you that you do have a look at the Recovery Curriculum website. There are a range of podcasts, about 15 of them on there, and if you like, for example, what Katie Fielding says to you this afternoon when she speaks, then Katie has a podcast on that website as well, and there's lots of resources, and indeed the Facebook group, which I think, I don't run the Facebook group myself, but it's about 12,000 people now, and I know Anne said yesterday what a range of rich resources that there are there. So what I've been really thrilled about is the amount of resonance starting to come through, not least of all from Amanda Spielman, where she's talking about that schools need to make decisions based on the needs of each individual child, and that some children have lost a lot of time. And she's talking about rebuilding. I called it recovery, and as Maggie rightly pointed out, it's recovery through the curriculum, very much so, very much so. Education itself is a therapeutic process. It's deeply rewarding to children when they're meaningfully engaged in education. The engagement in education with a liberation of the intrinsic motivation that lurks within each and every child. And at the moment, lots of things are masking and clouding that for the children, camouflaging their true ability to be an efficient and effective learner. And whatever the attainment and achievement outcomes, every child can be that. So there's this rebuilding going on, and interestingly, with Amanda Spielman's Chief Inspector's report, she's highlighting the vulnerability of so many children, and even she is saying that, particularly for our children with SEND, who have been a major focus for my career, she's saying that for some of them, will they truly ever recover from this? And I was part of a briefing this morning, one of the Westminster briefings with parliamentarians, and working with my colleague Professor Chitsaban from the NHS, who leads on child mental health. We're looking at 1 in 6 children now with a mental health issue. It was 1 in 9 when this calendar year started. It's 1 in 6 now. Next slide, please. So if you know the recovery curriculum, I don't need to rehearse some of this, but it's very much, again, to echo what Vanessa said, about that compassionate leadership. But colleagues, it's a construct. It's about how we go forward and construct a curriculum that is truly responsive, that will touch that child at their point of learning need in this moment. And this moment is a stark contrast to any other moments that our children have lived through. And we may not want it to be a static term. Interesting, again, listening to Helen before we came online, that they're considering another term to describe the next phase of their curriculum work. And that seems to me to be totally appropriate. Let's keep it responsive to the moment and just create that culture of kindness. But linked with that culture of kindness needs to be a finding out culture. And that's very much what the schools partnership work has been about. Discovering, investigating, being curious, finding out where our children are at now and where they're moving to, and keeping up with them, making those best informed judgments. Next slide, please. So, as you know, there are 5 losses. What I've done here to just keep it fresh for you is analyse the recent Ofsted report based on their 900 visits and correlated it with the 5 losses. So, for example, a loss of routine, the Ofsted evidence would talk about regression in toilet training. Some children have gone back into nappies. A loss of structure, children that had developed pencil grip maybe have lost it completely or have gone from tripod back to a palmer grip, or the ability to hold a knife and fork. For every child, there's been a loss of friendship. Children that I've interviewed as part of various research projects I've had ongoing throughout the pandemic period has talked about that loss of friendship, whether a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old. And interestingly, Ofsted picked up that loss of social interaction. One head teacher of a primary school reporting walking into his nursery and hearing the children playing in silence. That is not a natural state for 3, 4, 5-year-olds. They were back into solitary play, not the sort of associative and cooperative play that we would expect to be a dynamic for children in that nursery situation. And that loss of opportunity, you've only got to talk to our GCSE and A-level students from last year to know what loss of opportunity actually meant. But Ofsted coming out very strongly about mental distress. And they too have echoed what is definitely the national trend, that we have 2 spikes, particularly within the erosion of the mental health state in our children, and those are self-harm and eating disorders. And sadly, the age profile is dropping into year 5, 6. So for primary schools, we have a real challenge there to ensure that those staff have training in those areas, whereas our secondary colleagues will traditionally have had that sort of training. And that loss of freedom. Very interesting points from Ofsted here about a loss of stamina, children not being able to get through a 1-hour lesson of mathematics, say. So let's think about how we deal with that. So maybe we do 20 minutes of maths and then a 5-minute mindfulness session using some of Tina Ray's excellent work, or then another 20 minutes of maths and 5 minutes of a breathing exercise or a standing on the spot physical activity, because physical fitness has definitely reduced, hasn't it, for all of us? We've all been more sedentary during this period of time. And I want to commend to you some excellent work from Victoria Wells of the Youth Sports Trust, where she's developed this wonderful notion of sports sanctuaries. And if you go to my website or the Recovery Curriculum website, you'll find further information about that on there. It's a wonderful think piece again, as this was originally a think piece, and my goodness, the schools partnership have done some wonderful thinking. Next slide, please. And all of those losses are going to generate these consequences: bereavement, yes, grief. Some children, you cannot have lost 58,000 people in our country without it being some child's grandparent, some child's aunt or uncle, or the next door neighbour, or that nice person in the street who was NHS frontline and lost their life. Children have heard about grief. Have we had those conversations? Do we have the resources from Nurture UK, their wonderful 60-minute bereavement box, all beautifully laminated, so very hygienic. We like laminated, don't we? Do have a look at those. Those are going to be in the resource pack that Anna's put together to support this. And attachment too. Bernardo's reporting a 44% increase in children going into care. We know implicitly from all we ever knew about children in the care system, that will bring with it attachment issues. And anxiety, oh my goodness, the toxicity of anxiety. There are secondary stressors that are lurking and have yet to come out in our children. All of these are traumas. And we need to think about how we deal with that, because we know again, from what we knew before the pandemic, if trauma goes unprocessed, it will have real consequences in adulthood and achieve and reduce the attainment and achievement in adulthood, a loss of meaningful relationships, a loss of achieving income potential, etc. Next slide, please. So anxiety, I particularly want to just focus on for a moment, and to remind ourselves that when cortisol is released in the brain, and we all need a bit of cortisol to get us kick-started at the beginning of the day, that cortisol, if it rises to the surface of the brain, will actually block the imprint on the brain. So you could have taught the most brilliant lesson, but that child in your class who didn't say boo to a goose sat there masking or camouflaging that they were doing the activity that you'd set, but in fact was rigid with fear and couldn't wait to get out of the claustrophobic atmosphere, as they saw it, of your classroom. If I asked them what they'd learned, they might say, I don't know, because they didn't learn anything because they were so anxious. So we do need some strategies in class that are regulating anxiety, and indeed encouraging children to self-regulate their anxiety. We can't do this on our own, colleagues. The children have got to take some responsibility, but we need to be teaching them strategies that enable them to take that responsibility. And let's remind ourselves, therefore, that the anxious child is not a learning child. Next slide. So the 5 levers, as Matthew put them together, these are really pedagogical levers and very much focused on relationships. Relationships are so key. We cannot tell each other enough, it's so good to see you. Because when we do, we affirm that we are survivors and we honour the memory of those that are not survivors. This pandemic, colleagues, has stripped us all back to our common humanity. At times I just think our schools are at the moment a collection of human beings of all ages, regardless of status and position in a school. And we need to come together as that community, bringing our parents with us, who made such a magnificent contribution with the home learning. Colleagues, we've got the best chance in 2 decades, I think, to put meat on the bones of what we mean by partnership with parents, instead of blinding them with data that is meaningless to them. How many parents in Parents' Evening ask, is my child happy? That's really what they want to know. And at the moment, parents know they've got a lot of children who are not happy. There is a pervasive sadness, a subduedness about our children. We need to explicitly scaffold how the children learn. There's already been a comment in the chat room that is resonating with this beautifully. Don't expect that the children just transferred what they knew before to this situation, or they might have known how to do a particular numerical problem before, but it's just gone. It's gone. They have been traumatized, in the fight, flight or fear in their brains has kind of frozen those neural pathways. They need to be reboosted, regenerated. And let's make the curriculum transparent. Have we asked the children what it is they want to learn? My son Matthew, who wrote these, did with his student parliament. And they all said, from year 7 to year 12, when we come back to school, we want teachers to explain to us, what is COVID-19? What's a pandemic? Why do people die from this? That's not an unreasonable request from any child. And my question to you is, have you taught that lesson? Is it ready? And children need space. They've lost a lot of the self-efficacy, their belief in themselves as confident learners. So let's give them opportunities to rediscover through their self-image and self-confidence. Next slide. So there needs to be something for everyone. I know some heads are saying, well, our children have bounced back and they all seem fine. Yes, they have, but every child has lived through a pandemic, is living through a pandemic. Every child has heard that death toll. We just need to make sure it's embedded, it's explained, it's rationalised for them. They're hearing things beyond their years. They need to be contextualised and explained in an age-appropriate manner. For some, that needs to be a focused recovery, where we have perhaps some personalised intervention groups for children who want to discuss. And again, I've recommended a range of resources. There's a wonderful journal called My Journey that's been written by a PSHE teacher, produced now by Butterfly Print, very cheap and cheerful. It's of the moment, and we need some resources of the moment to enable that deep recovery for some children. The Cabot Federation in Bristol, I know, with their 23 schools, they're planning a recovery type class for 2 years across those 23 schools, because that's how long they anticipate for some children the process of reconnecting and readjusting, rejoining fully, reattaining their achievement levels is going to take. Next slide, please. Before we can hope to return to a full curriculum, we've got to recalibrate our children's learning. And we've got to include their mental health state in that. This rapid erosion of mental health state. I mean, in teenagers, particularly young women, there's been a 27.2% decline in their mental health state. Ultimately, all of that will undermine their attainment and achievement. Next slide. And what I loved about the Schools Partnership Programme, they really got to grips with the systematic nature of this approach, and yes, recovery through curriculum, and collected the evidence around that, because the recovery curriculum is a curriculum of inquiry, discovering, finding out where our children are at and where we can take them to, how we can help them, how we can be kind and compassionate to restore their belief in themselves. And I think this process of peer review, so embedded in the daily lived practice of you as teachers, but also in the daily lived experience of our children, which Dylan Williams says should be the foundation of the curriculum. Next slide, please. So there will be some resources in a resource pack for you to follow up, and I hope you will find those useful. I think perhaps there's one more slide, Maggie. Yes, the one resource I am going to refer to, and thanks to Anne for including this, I had a commission during the lockdown to write 2 children's books, Lenny and Lily in lockdown and Lenny and Lily return to school. And these are wordless books. And before any of you tell me we've very high literacy standards, Barry, and we couldn't possibly use such a thing, these are deliberately wordless. Colleagues, this is not about literacy, this is about emotional literacy. This is about our children recognising and naming those emotions. And what schools that have been using these, and let me say they are completely free. I fundraised the £12,000 to make sure that I paid the publisher to put them digitally online, and they're there to be downloaded. Send them home over Christmas. If children go out in a bubble, send them home. What are you sending home that is about their emotional well-being, not just about their literacy and numeracy? That is not the sole curriculum diet our children need, because if we don't give them a diet that addresses their current need, we will end up with some very educationally malnourished children. So do have a look at these. What heads are telling me at the moment, where they've been using them since they were published in September, is the children now tell not the story of Lenny and Lily. They use the pictures to structure their story of their lived experience in this pandemic, which as yet, colleagues, and yes, we celebrate the joy of the vaccine, but it is not over. Thank you.
Barry, thank you so much for that. Extraordinarily rich, and I'm sure people are desperate to engage in conversation with you for a little while, and we will certainly provide opportunity to do that. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so we can see each other and some members of the panel here, because we're now going to move on to hear from 3 school leaders who I said earlier are really demonstrating that relational, compassionate, child-centered, thoughtful approach to the recovery curriculum. And I know all 3 of you will be the first to say, we're not experts, we're not experts. However, the fact that you are engaging in this, you certainly have, I know, some insights to share with us. Now, we haven't given each of them very long, and I have to apologise now for being so brutal in terms of not giving you as much time, I know, that you as you would have liked. But hopefully there'll be lots of questions and conversation after the 3 have spoken, and we've definitely got time for that. So welcome to the 3 of you in your very busy lives. Really appreciate you coming along. And we're going to start, Katie, I think, by hearing from you. Katie Fielding, who is the Deputy Head of Kingsbury Primary School in Lancashire, and you mentioned her, Barry, because I know you've worked closely with Katie, and you've got a wonderful rainbow curriculum, I know, that that is very much appreciated by the children and the families. So yes, Katie, tell us what you've been doing.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to share what we've been doing at Kingsbury School. Kingsbury is a special school, a primary special school, just so you're aware before I start talking. And I've got the pleasure today of very, very quickly sharing our whistle-stop tour of our rainbow experience journey with you all today. I hope that by sharing our experiences together, we can collaboratively support each other on our recovery curriculum and ensure, as Barry always says, that our treasures are getting the education and the opportunities that they really, really deserve. Our rainbow experience was developed months ago when I got a ping of an email from Barry saying, what do you think of this that me and Matthew have written? And the rest is history, as they say. And very quickly, since then, our rainbow curriculum, our recovery curriculum, has been through that review cycle hundreds and hundreds of times, as we're constantly reviewing and reflecting and trying to make things better for our children and our staff within our school. And also through sharing our experiences and through sharing it with staff, through parents and through people like Barry and other colleagues, it's helped us to basically accept that feeling that we're not fighting fire all the time, and it's become a more manageable experience to kind of know that everybody's in the same boat, and it's kind of easier to accept that those very high ambitious aims that we were hoping for by Christmas are really not really going to happen at all, and we've got to kind of slow things down but also keep up that pace for our children. Our rainbow experience has focused on the mental health of everybody in our Kingsbury family, from parents to children to staff to senior leaders to everybody who works within our community, and about our well-being and about re-engaging our children in their learning, as well as re-engaging staff, because a lot of our staff have found lockdown really tricky and are still finding it tricky and really hard to come back to. And we've done that through an holistic approach to our curriculum, really focusing on engaging meaningful learning opportunities for our children that make them want to learn and make them want to play and be with each other and interact with each other. A detailed explanation of our recovery curriculum can be found on the podcast, which I have sent a link through, and also our curriculum handbook, because I haven't got the time to basically explain how we've done it and what we've done, but it says it all in the podcast. Our rainbow experience it's been based around the 5 levers that Barry and Matthew talked about, and we have planned it into 4 stages. We planned the lockdown stage, which was when we were all initially in lockdown, the transition back to school, which we invested heavily in communication and working with parents and making sure that everything was right for our children to come back. And then the next stage was the return to school, and then the moving forward stage. If I'm being completely honest, our recovery hasn't really ever got going, and I still feel that as a school we're still in that transition stage. Some children are on that road to recovery, but some aren't even there, and some of our staff still aren't even there, because it has been a little bit like the hokey cokey. We've been in and out and shaking everything all about, because it's been so disruptive. We've been closing bubbles, reducing numbers, staff absence has been absolutely through the roof. We've all got young families who've had to go into staying at home with them, and we've just had to be really compassionate and really understanding, but also making sure that we're doing what's right for our children at Kingsbury. We were very naive in thinking when we came back in September that by January we'd be ready to rock and roll and return to things as our curriculum, our Kingsbury Way curriculum. How wrong were we? Our plans have changed many times, and we're constantly changing and amending and thinking on our feet. And instead of beating ourselves up about it and getting frustrated and feeling like we're failing, we're now taking each day as it comes, as we can't plan for every eventuality, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, today, in the next 5 minutes, in the next half an hour. And that's really hard to manage as a leader, because you've always got to be out there with a smile on your face thinking everything's hunky-dory. We've gone through all the emotions, all of us: fear, frustration, anger and laughter, but we're all human, and we're all really doing our best that we can for our children and for each other. And I think looking after each other is what's kept us together, because if we look after each other as a staff, then our children are also getting the best deal that they can as well. So what have our challenges been? Our challenges have mainly been staff absence, staff anxieties. They're all panicking now about what if they get COVID before Christmas and they've got to self-isolate, and it's managing that on a day-to-day. remote learning, as our children have got very complex special needs, that's been kind of headache. And again, instead of just carrying on with what we're always doing, we're constantly reflecting it, working with parents to see how we can change it and adapt it and make it more meaningful for our parents. They don't want loads of worksheets and loads of activities. What do they want with support that will mean that lockdown is better for their family and their family life? And a lot of it for our children has been about managing the behaviour and the sensory needs, not the academic side, because our children academically aren't in any kind of way to learn. Their mental health and well-being has been the most. Professional development and training, I found that so frustrating, because I know where strategically I want to go and where we want Kingsbury to be and where we want to be by September, and I've had to kind of rein myself in, which is really, really hard, and remember that I'm in 6th gear and the rest of the staff and children are in 1st. So that's been quite hard, but it's also maintaining that ambition and those high standards of where we're going and not losing sight of that and just being bogged down in the day-to-day COVID and this and that and this. So what have we done to stop ourselves from sinking? Number one, and we always put the children first, and whenever we're changing something, wherever we're reflecting on anything, we always ask ourselves, why are we doing it and what difference will it make to the children? And if we can't justify why, and we can't justify what difference it's going to make to the children, then we don't do it, because our children have always got to come first. Laughter and looking after each other. You've got to be a bit daft to work in Kingsbury, and boy, has that paid off over these last 6-9 months. We're constantly praising each other, we're constantly reinforcing what a transition it's been, and what an achievement it's been to transition our children back into our environment. Our children who can't cope with lots of structure, lots of routine, and have needed lots and lots of support, and that is really down to our really dedicated, hard-working staff and team that have taken full credit and basically put a smile on their face every single day. Communication has been key, clear, effective communication with staff and with parents constantly, because then they're aware of what's happening and why we're having to do. We've invested a lot of time in doing passports back to school for parents and staff, so we can get a judgment of where everybody's at, and we've done it again as we've come back after October half term, and SLT. We reflect on that and move forward and make sure that we're reassuring all the time. We're constantly reflecting, constantly adapting to ensure that we don't sink, but also, as I said, we need that ambition and drive. So we've now stripped back to our school improvement plan and our rainbow curriculum, and we've put it in tier stages, because we need to know what are our non-negotiables if next term we are hit again massively by closing bubbles. So what are our non-negotiables, so we still feel like we're achieving something? What's next, and what is our gold standard? So if everything's hunky-dory, where do we want to be by Easter? And I found that more because you're getting that praise, and you know you're achieving something.
Katie, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to stop you there. We could go on another hour. We're getting comments about, you know, how honest and reassuring all that this is. Katie, thanks for being so human. Thanks for being so open. The sense of common humanity has really come through what you've said. So I'm sorry to have to.
No, it's fine.
No, you'd nearly finish. And huge thanks for sharing that with us. And the questions already coming up, so we'll make sure we field those to you. And have a look on the chat, because there's one particular question about the passports that you mentioned. Thank you. I'm now going to move over to Focus Trust, because I know you want to talk a little bit about some of the levers and how you've put some of the levers into practice. So I'm going to invite Liz to speak first, and then we'll move on to you, Helen. Other way round.
The other way around. Yeah.
We'll do it the other way around. Okay,
yeah.
Fine. Okay. Helen, off you go.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for coming along this evening. It's going to be great to be able to learn from you and share our work. So as you know, we've got 15 academies. We're in the North West and West Yorkshire, and 14 of our academies are in Tier 3. And so we've been under strict measures for a long time. The foundations for our trust work are our 4 values, which are care, dare, fair and share, and they underpin everything we do, as well as our ethos of collective efficacy. And in our trust, that means we work together on the things that matter to improve outcomes for all, and that is really important that we do that together. So I'm going to speak about the first 2 levers and what we've done across the trust, and then Liz will speak in more detail about what we've done in 2 of our schools where she's the executive head. Now, in our trust, relationships at all levels are key. We don't take relationships for granted. They need to be worked at. And in our view, honesty and trust are at the core of a successful relationship. So as CEO, I make sure it's my role to ensure every single one of our 920 colleagues has a real sense of purpose, because why else would you get up at the moment in this pandemic? And we hope that everybody feels motivated to achieve our commitment, which is learning together, making the difference. During lockdown 1, we realised that taking away the routine of coming to work in school every day and coping with personal COVID challenges that were happening in different people's lives did strip people of their core purpose and cause a lot of anxiety. Many colleagues struggled with, if they lived on their own, the isolation, the self-doubt they were going through. So we had to work hard to communicate clearly with everybody and connect everyone. So we ensured every single staff member was supported to find, have a purpose and understand it might be different than what you were doing in March, before March 20th, but this is your purpose now. And we wanted them to make sure they had they were making a valued contribution to the education of all children. So that included year group forums for all learning support assistants, teaching assistants, and we're carrying on with this kind of thing each time we go with bubbles collapse. Welfare calls and check-ins, ensuring that all staff connected with their children when the bubbles collapse, as in lockdown, putting photographs on Twitter. Even the children that we couldn't welcome back fully in July because of numbers, we ensured they had a reconnection face-to-face or Zoom visit with their current teacher and their new teacher, and that's all been really valued by everybody. Now in June, I was hopeful that we're back to normal after May half term, but in June the reality hit and we recognised this was going to be a long and difficult pandemic. And we chose to adapt our existing curriculum statements and create our reconnection curriculum statement. And Liz will talk about this in more detail. Our vision is great academies at the heart of our communities. And having read this book, puts it right way around, having read this book by John Tomset and Johnny Utley, I did think a bit like you, Katie, surely we put children first. However, when you read that book, it's about making sure the staff are as well qualified and supported as they possibly can be in order to then support children to be the best they can be. So having read that book, we revised our appraisal policy. And we now just have the one objective across the trust, whatever your role, be great at my job. And we hope that that'll really help people to, help us fulfill our vision of great academies. And our appraisal process is underpinned by a coaching philosophy with relationships at the heart. So the appraiser asks the appraisee lots of questions like, what's going to make you get out of bed in the morning? And you really find what makes a person tick. Now, this term, we've had to focus primarily on reconnecting with each other, lots of PSHE work, lots of wellbeing activities. But we've realised that every time a bubble collapses, and we've had lots, the children need time to recover, the staff need time to recover. So that's been so important and will carry on being like that over the next year. As you said, Barry, the children are very quiet when they come back. I was in a year 5 classroom the other morning, their first day back after 2-week isolation, it was silent. And it takes time to re-establish yourself in the dynamics of that classroom. To talk about community, briefly, as we know, none of us have ever experienced anything like this, and it's been vital we keep a strong sense of community. Colleagues and staff surveys tell me that our values and ethos of collective efficacy make them feel like they're part of a community, the Focus Trust family. We've had some songs made about it, and this has been vital as we've had to navigate very difficult COVID circumstances and head off potential crises, and we've all done this and kept strong together. We have community champions in each academy, and they embarked on projects during lockdown to connect and support the communities, for example, buying nappies, baby milk, holding food and toy stalls for vulnerable families. And those have continued because family circumstances are getting tougher in many cases. Our procurement lead and community champion did produce themed weekly family support newsletters with lots of links to resources and activities. These are still necessary and are now being produced on a monthly basis. Now, as a community of leaders, we have really needed to dig deep and be resilient like never before, but also share our vulnerabilities. We've had to admit when we don't have all the answers. The fact that I am leading the COVID committee is quite scary because I certainly don't have all the answers. And we've shared when we don't feel great. In our trust, the culture is such that it's okay to say you don't feel okay some days because you know that there'll be support there. we've discovered that our staff have struggled a lot more than we thought they would do, and often in many cases more than our children. So over time, we've offered Therapeutic Tuesdays, which was yoga, nutrition and meditation, and we offer telephone helplines and counselling. Now, since the summer, we've been trying to look beyond COVID and move forward with hope. We've had sessions with a facilitator where we've shared our fears and our hopes. We've had motivational speakers like Jazz Ampafar and Peter Homer, which renew our sense of purpose and commitment to meet our children where they are and inspire them to be the best they can be. We know how important it is to keep everyone mentally and physically active. So in the summer, we had a challenge where we tried to walk around the world twice, run, walk and cycle, to fundraise for charity, but it was also about connecting us all over the summer. Recognising the months ahead are going to be dark, we've launched our next community challenge, which is to do 10,000 steps a day. And this is already connecting different people, children and families across the trust. Now, our key priority going forward is to keep our community safe. I've literally got one sentence.
I thought you might have.
One sentence. Obviously, our priority is to keep everybody safe, but we're determined to lift our heads up, and we hope, Liz will tell you now, that if at trust level we motivate and inspire our leaders and renew their sense of purpose, they will go back into school and do the same with the staff, and hopefully everybody will do the very best they can. I'll hand over to Liz now. Thank you.
Lovely. Helen, thank you so much. Your focus on values comes through so strongly in what you say, and we know how important that is to Focus Trust and how that's now helped you to lead through this period. There's interest in your appraisal target, love it, coming up on the chat, so there might be more questions about that. Thank you. Liz, who's brought her Christmas tree along, over to you to say a little more about some of those levers.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. It's quite exciting, and I've really enjoyed listening to other contributors as well. It's been really good. So I'm Liz, I'm Executive Head of 2 primary schools in Bradford, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we've implemented some of the levers. By no means do we think that we're experts in doing it. We've just really been trying to gauge where the children are and meet their needs, meet them where they are really. So for the first 2 weeks in September, we realised that the children might need something a little bit different than usual. It's the first time that they were back together since March. And so we base our curriculum around a quality text approach, and we used a text called Here We Are by Oliver Jeffers, which is an introduction to the world really for his newborn son. And we used that as a lever and as a basis to talk about the newness of COVID, the differences, the similarities and all of those things. So teachers use this in every year group right across both schools to gauge children's feelings, help them to share their own experiences of lockdown, the good things, the things that they wish hadn't happened, the things that they might think, well, I'd rather keep that in place. And then also about the similarities and differences of being in school between March and September, and what the differences are, what their worries are they happy to be back, what bits are they happy to be back about, all of those things, which I'm sure everybody has done nationwide. So the book also gave us a bit of an insight into how we wanted to develop our curriculum for the whole of the term. Obviously, since then, we've realised it's going to be as an ongoing curriculum, really. It's not just been for this term, it's a very long-term project, really. And using the ideas from the children in helping them to acclimatise and building them into further planning. So those discussions have really helped. We've really relied on the practice that we've got in place in terms of nurture. So things like visual timetables, really practical ideas that you can have in the classroom, which, and again, I'm sure up and down the country, that's exactly the same. All of the things in terms of the risk assessments that we've had in place, so the bubble mentality, as we call it, and children who, we've had 11 bubbles self-isolating at any one time this term, and some of the children have had to come to school when the brothers and sisters have stayed at home, and that's been difficult because they didn't want to come. they wanted to stay at home. So it's making sure that they understand all the time, and being transparent about those actions that we've taken, but then also looking at how they're learning when they're not in school. And again, how we can reconnect them back again after that isolation. And that's been tricky because children have had different experiences during just those 2 weeks as well. So we feel that it's something that's really long term and ongoing. We've also got some good metacognitive practice already in school. We feel that it's more of a mindset that we've been able to instill. We were part of a project run by York University the last couple of years called Reflected. And so we don't have fails, we have first attempts in learning. And I know that they're a bit cliche, but I'm sure you all know about those as well. We don't have, I can't do that. It's, you can't do it yet, so you'll end up there. But we've built on that by looking at a schema-based approach and looking at drawing on previous knowledge to develop expanding existing knowledge so that the children can know more and remember more. And I'm sure that's a phrase that is drilled into our brains, knowing more and remembering more. So the metacognitive approach that we teach is a three-pronged approach, looking at myself, me as the child, my friends and wider family, and then the things that I know from the wider world, so what they might have read or seen on the news, etc. And using that every time we introduce something like a new book or a new topic or something, to really think about where can we expand existing schema and use those to really emphasize the previous knowledge, develop long-term memory, and make that knowledge stronger. So we've also developed some visual prompts. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to run through these. So this is embedded now in classroom practice. So we've got, what do I already know? What's the most important thing as part of this? Any sensory connections that we can make? The inferences that we can draw? How can we synthesize new information? And how can I fix things that I don't understand? So very, very quick whistle-stop tour through just some of the things that we've done. I hope they've been useful, but we feel that those are strategies that have very much supported the reconnection and recovery, and that will keep on going, you know, over the coming months and years.
Lovely, thank you, Liz. So thoughtful and fantastic to get those practical examples as well. I'm sure we'll get some more questions about those, and you know, any resources any of the speakers have referred to will be in the resource pack. So please take a moment now to pop any thoughts, any comments in the chat. There are some already coming up. Some members of the panel have already replied to some of the questions, which is great. So while we're waiting for those to come up, and people are loving the real life experiences and so on, and the real sense, we can't see all 195, nearly 200 of you, but we really get this sense of the common humanity, I think, Barry, that you referenced. I'm going to start, I've picked up 2 or 3 that have come in. So I'm just going to pose this, and I don't know, Barry, you might want to pick this up initially, which is a real sense that relationally based and play-based curriculum, and the sense that both parents and children are recognizing the happiness, the sense of joy and happiness that comes through that. And how do we continue to foreground that in our work? Linked to the recalibration of learning and what Ofsted's view might be. So that's one part of what's come up. But then there was one other comment, which was, how can this become our normal practice? How can this be something that we never go back from? So that sense of it becoming hardwired into our DNA as schools for generations to come. What a fantastic legacy from this pandemic that would be. Barry, do you want to comment on any of that?
Take your point there about happiness. If, Maggie, we analysed all the research around on mental health, it boils down to 2 things: what makes us happy and what makes us sad. And we as adults talk about that thing called inner strength. And when we've had a bad day at school and we go home, perhaps as Liz and Helen have been referring to, maybe we go home upset some days because we've had to put children out of school, and we know there are consequences for some of our children. We can't always be sure, particularly if you've read the HMCI's annual report. She's very worried about vulnerable children, as is the Children's Commissioner, about those children going home to situations of domestic abuse. And so one of the resources, Maggie, that is in the pack is I've come up with this idea of happiness boxes, and they are shoebox. Perhaps the professor shouldn't be talking about shoebox, but I don't care. I'm a teacher, and a happiness box is just a shoebox that a child decorates. Well, that's one art lesson sorted, isn't it? And then it's what they choose to put in their happiness box. Because, Maggie, with respect, what makes you happy, or the music you choose, wouldn't be perhaps the music I would choose. And those happiness boxes, because you have a lid to them, they're sealed, they're safe, they're personalised to that child. And then maybe the teacher just needs to get used to the pitch and pace of her lessons or his lessons, and to be able to say, look, children, let's just have 5 minutes with our happiness boxes, because that gives the children a chance to self-regulate. And that soft bit of fluffy cloth that a year 6 boy pulls out to rub frantically, nobody says, oh my goodness, what's a boy of your age doing with something like that? It's what he needs, and who gives a toss at the moment. It's fine. It's fine. So I think there are simple interventions that actually have roots in research. And I've written you a rationale so that nobody can criticize you for using a shoebox and calling it a happiness box.
Lovely. And Cassandra Williams has just said to us, we loved using these at our school. The children love sharing them with the rest of the class. That's really resonated. Katie, I saw you nodding there. So do you want to come in, and then I'm just going to quickly come to Helen and Liz before I come to another question, which I think might be relevant for a number of people who are on this webinar. Katie, happiness.
Yeah, we've done the happiness boxes, like Barry has said, because for a lot of our children, they are non-verbal. So it helps to have that transition from home to school, because it can be something that can go from home to school, and they can't tell us when they're anxious or they're stressed or unhappy, and that normally results in challenging behaviours. So a lot of physical, a lot of sensory, teaching them to self-regulate, because if they are not regulated and they're not happy, then they're not going to learn. And we've really focused on engaging our children back to learning, so really making it meaningful learning, enjoyable experiences, because if we don't engage them, then we're fighting a losing battle. But the happiness boxes have worked for us in a different way, because it's our children's voice, so we know that when they're with that, telling us that they're happy, and it brings that memory of home, because a lot of them have been just at home with their parent and not seen any other adults or children in 6 months. So
lovely, great. And quite a lot coming up in the chat now. People have used them and call them chatterboxes and so on. So a real resonance here. Helen, I'm going to come to you, because I'd like, if possible, to pick up this sense of can this now become our normal practice? Can this be a really substantial legacy from the pandemic? And given you're the chief executive of a multi-academy trust, just be good to hear your thoughts on that and how we might attend to that in a way that we almost can never go back to where we were. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've always tried to be happy. we strive, and I think that's definitely, I think our culture is, let's look on the bright side. We've not written it down anywhere, but I think one example of that was in July, we'd planned a day with a great facilitator, and we knew it would be very valuable to our leaders, but it was the day after all the guidance came out from the DFE. And one or two of our principals got in touch with them and said, we can't do tomorrow, Helen, we're going to have to postpone it, we need to deal with this guidance. And I said, well, actually, I think tomorrow will be more beneficial for you. That guidance will wait. It doesn't need to be put into place till September. We've got the COVID committee that will look at it. And actually, the day was fantastic. It's what I referred to, where we looked at our fears and our hopes, and just try and have that positivity that, we look beyond COVID. And I think that's important, that we pass that on to our leaders, who pass it on to our staff, pass it on to our children, deal with obviously the inevitable. We've had so many bubble collapses. You've got to be realistic. We've had to strip back our plans as well, Katie. But we also last week had a session with our leaders where we evaluated the impact of what we've done this autumn term. And it was really heartening to see we've actually done so much that's other than COVID. So that was really heartening. Again, we'll strip back what we're planning for spring, but that you just got to keep that as your culture, not just deal with COVID.
Yeah, great. Great, thank you.
Really,
really beautifully explained there and shared, Helen. Thank you. So Liz, I wonder if you might just pick up this question about the recalibration of learning and other expectations that are on us as teachers and leaders, and how we keep that our equilibrium, our balance, our stability as we do what we know is right. What are your thoughts on that?
It does come back to happiness, doesn't it? Because I think if a child is happy, they will make good. I've always believed that if you make the children happy, if your classroom is welcoming and inviting, that's not to say there isn't the challenge, but as long as the support is there, we've found that the children will thrive, and they will be much better learners. The learning behaviours will be much better under those circumstances. And that's the emphasis really that we've placed. We haven't, we've really, as a senior leadership team, it's been heartening to see the very, very small amounts of monitoring that we have done, and the very, the skeleton sort of monitoring that we've been doing, that actually, despite maybe cutting certain things back and not being able to do things as we would normally do, actually the children are really engaged. They've come back, they're showing that resilience because we've invited them to share their experiences, and then we've used those experiences in order to provide what they need. So we've found actually that in creating the right environment, that under those conditions, the majority of children are beginning to thrive again. So we felt that that's been really important. Yeah. I'm sure it's the same in all schools.
There are a lot of comments coming through around the shared experience here around the way that you are leading your own schools and groups of schools. I'm going to come to a question which is from Jenny Baines, and Barry, I'm going to ask you to comment on this. I see you've just turned your camera off.
Okay.
But I'm going to ask you the question because I think that the work your son's doing and has been working with you on might be helpful here. It's a question from Jenny Baines, who says, I work in an upper school, year 9 to 13. Is there any thoughts or experience you've had or others have had of how we can use the principles of the recovery curriculum whilst working in the constraints of the examination cycle? And I'm sure there are some upper schools and high schools that are feeling that similar sense of tension. And you talked about anxiety for those children in year 11, in year 12, in year 13, and loss of opportunity. How does that link with your thoughts on the recovery curriculum and working with older children?
I think in essence it goes back again to pitch and pace, even when they're on an examination syllabus. But what I'm hearing secondary colleagues say particularly, there has to be time to talk. We mustn't have the elephant in the room that the children have just been out, year 11 have just been out, for example, the bubble burst and they were out. It needs to be talked about how they might readjust their learning, and how you as a teacher are redesigning things to accommodate what has happened to them. It seems to me such a pity that Wales and Scotland have made decisions about the examination system, and pupils in England are still pretty much in the dark about will they have to go through formal examinations. And the media is not doing a lot, I think, in a helpful way to calm that. They're fueling the debate because it makes headlines, but it isn't helpful, particularly to that age group of students who are well able to read those headlines. I think too, those kind of sessions where it is a quasi-counselling type situation, again, I understand from secondary colleagues, they're having to bring more of those in because students just cannot cope with this level of stress. And I think there needs to be, Maggie, some direct teaching of mindfulness, of breathing exercises. Don't assume. There are some wonderful apps out there, like things like Calm Harm, and that's for students who are particularly prone to self-harming. That's one of self-regulating. This morning there was one recommended on the webinar that I was on then of Think Ninja, and apparently that's working very well with teenagers.
Lovely, thank you, Barry. So before we go back to some final words from you, Barry, and thanks so much to the school leaders here on the panel for sharing your experience. Ben, Vanessa, I'd just like to turn to you because I know you've had massive experience both at school leadership level and working with partnerships of schools, and I'm sure you'd like to add something at this point.
Yeah, Maggie, I noticed something particular that came through from Alistair. And he says, we 100% need to take the learning and silver linings from this period. And I remember distinctly talking with Barry about this and colleagues on the SPP team. And the first question in the framework is about the extent to which we've acknowledged the losses and the gains from both pupils, parents and staff. And just briefly, conversations I've had with SPP colleagues with conversations with other colleagues up and down the country, people I work with, so many colleagues have said, look, you know, in the midst of all this challenging, demanding time, there have been some really good things and we want to hold on to them. And we don't want to go back. We don't want to, you know, we need to recreate this future and we don't want to go back to how it was because this is making a difference and it's better. And I think that's such a positive, you know, I love that comment from Andrew, that silver lining, you know, for some of us, we've got to look hard to find them, haven't we? But they are there. And I think that, you know, acknowledging the gains as well is something we must hold on to.
Yeah, lovely, lovely. And of course, peer review can help do that, can't it, Vanessa? Because we always say that a peer review is designed to look at both what's amazing and awe-inspiring in the school, within the community, and also what might be even better. So that balance is really important. So thank you for reminding us of that. So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen and hand over to you in just a moment, Barry, just for some final words and thoughts with all of us before we just look ahead to next steps.
And can I also thank Helen and Liz and Katie for those invaluable insights. It was it's great to work with colleagues when we're on the same page, and so thank you very much. So, and I think this is echoing the statements that are just coming through in the chat, that more than ever we need that curriculum diet that revives, nourishes and sustains our children. If we fail to deliver this, we will have some education in malnourished children. And you know, there's a lot of talk, and there was a lot of talk in a conversation I was having this morning about toxic stress and the neurobiological responses that toxic stress has, and how that will hinder children's development. And I just wonder if some children are seeing relevance in the curriculum they're offered at this moment in time. If we're not careful, they'll reject it, they'll become disenfranchised, disaffected, disengaged. Their issues will be compounded and their needs will go unmet. So more than ever, I think we need compassion, we need kindness, and we need creativity, the sorts of things that Liz and Helen and Katie have talked about, and indeed the ideas that you've been sharing in the chat. We need bold teachers, to echo some of the things that Andrew Buxton has said in his comment in the chat, that now is the time. He's right. We need bold teachers. We need nimble leadership. And I think Helen and Liz and Katie have given us examples of that. That's my son Matthew's term, is nimble leadership. We need to be moving swiftly. My goodness, I've never seen head teachers move so fast intellectually in all my career. And I've had 3 headships. It's unbelievable what our head teachers and senior leaders have achieved alongside the profession. And we need teachers and leaders who believe education is the key. Do we truly believe it? What is the education we want? We are the advocates for our children. If we need to argue that there needs to be greater capacity in the curriculum, then let's do it. But can I make one statutory recommendation? Colleagues, if you haven't looked at the moment at the Relationships, Health and Sex Education Curriculum Framework that's come out from DFE, that they accelerated the delivery of, that will be statutory from next September. We need sustained routes for whether you call it reconnection as Helen has, or whether we call it rainbow as Katie has, or whether we call it recovery as I have. Who cares what the word is? We're all going for the same sort of thing. What is the sustained route? And the sustained route, I firmly believe, is that RHSE curriculum framework, which after some, let's just say, focused conversations with the DFE, they're now going to extend in a very specific way to children with SEND. And Amanda Spielman's whole thing this morning in the reporting of her national report was about the invisibility of vulnerable children. And it should be a matter of national concern. Those colleagues that are concerned rightly about Ofsted, we need to say some of her words back to the Ofsted Inspectorate. It's been a joy not to have inspections this term. Next slide, please, Maggie. And I have to thank colleagues in the Schools Partnership, Anne and Vanessa and Maggie particularly, who the conversations I've had with them, because they're such tough thinking people with such incisive insights, they made me think, well, what is the curriculum going to be post-pandemic? Is it going to be down to design, or is it just going to be destiny? Is it going to become a COVID curriculum? Well, we don't need to be reminded of this awful period in our lives. So is that curriculum now going to go back to a very statutory one that might be a mismatch to some of this new profile of need? We are seeing children with compounded complexity, children that were straight down the line traditional learners prior to this may not be now. And I've used the phrase pitch and pace several times. What is the pitch and pace going to be? Is there going to be relevance? Will the children and young people see relevance? What's the responsivity to their profile of need? Does it offer healing and hope? Hope, colleagues, is the gift of childhood, and I fear that some children and young people already feel that their hope has been robbed. And what is, to use Maggie's words, that agency? What's the ownership of this curriculum? Do you really feel that you own the curriculum you've been delivering? I'm hearing much more now that you are owning things. Don't lose that. Do not sacrifice it. You are allowed a voice. You are a member of a unified profession. Let many voices shout loudly. What's the attribution of your curriculum? Next slide. One very useful approach is that from Evidence for Learning, who do the most magnificent app that Katie has used very extensively in her school. And it's about these vulnerable learners particularly, and it just wraps around. We need a curriculum that nurtures and nestles our children, that captures their attainment at their point of learning need and celebrates it. And oh boy, do we enjoy a good party. Next slide. Many things can wait. The child cannot. Now is the time their bones are being formed and their mind is being developed. To them we cannot say tomorrow. Their name is today. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Beautifully read that last quote. It was wonderful. Barry, thank you hugely. There are Barry's contact details. I'm sure don't mind at all people getting in touch with you, Barry, and I know we'll be carrying on talking to you, and all of us who've been engaged in this webinar, the presenters, will carry on talking to you, learning from and learning with you. So thank you for those few closing words, which will resonate with that call to action, that sense of agency, that sense of knowing and understanding our curriculum so fully we will never go back to how it was before. Thank you so much for joining us. And here at Education Development Trust, we are completely committed to continuing our work of turning thinking and research like Barry's and others into practice through building it into our model of peer review. So if you're already working with us, you can access lots of materials and support on virtual and blended peer review focused on COVID rapid response, and reviews looking at the recovery curriculum with a range of inquiry questions to support you through that. They're available for you to use on the member area of the SPP website. Just get in touch with us if you need a reminder of the password. And if you're new to Education Development Trust, new to the Schools Partnership Programme, but would like to find out more, we would love to hear from you, and our details are going to go on the next slide in a moment. And whether you're currently working with us or not, you will all receive an email with the link to this website, a link to the website shortly, which will have there the recording of this webinar, the slides, and all the resources that have been mentioned already for you to enjoy and use as we continue to build our curriculum over the next few months and indeed years. So can I end by thanking all of you, and those particularly who've contributed to our conversation today. Vanessa, Katie, Liz and Helen, your time invaluable. We really appreciate you taking part. To the SPP team who've worked really hard behind the scenes setting this up, and of course to all of you for attending, and big thanks to Barry, whose work was the inspiration for our work on the recovery curriculum, as well as the other groups that Vanessa referred to earlier on. And you know, we're really looking forward to carrying on working with all of you as we continue to develop this further. So enjoy the rest of your evening. As we always say, stay safe. And do keep in touch with us. Do get in touch with us if we can help you with anything as a result of this webinar. And we will look forward to that. But thank you to all of you.